Hello there, my name is Thomas O'Regan, and over the last 3.5 years, me and my wife have built an 11 property portfolio. And something that I see a lot of people getting hung up on is whether they should buy an apartment or whether they should buy a house. And that's not the question they should be asking. That's absolutely, I don't think about that ever when it comes to investing its wealth. It's like, what what property, what vehicle will I be able to put my money in that will create me the most amount of wealth? And, that doesn't, in those numbers, it's not a house or an apartment, right? It's not how it works. It's just what numbers create me the most amount of wealth. And people just really get hung up on, should I buy an apartment or a house? You're thinking about it all wrong. Sorry, guys. Anyway, here we go. So just a big note. As an investor, here's a good thing to think in the back of your mind. When you are buying property, if you're able to buy properties as close to, if not at the value of the land, and you are able to attach rental income to it, you'll become very wealthy. It is true what they say, land appreciates, building depreciates, but it's not 100% true, right? And this is something that is hard to comprehend, but the reality is, yes, buildings depreciate, but they can only depreciate so much. It gets to the point where the building has depreciated so much, and I understand this is going to be really hard to get your head around, but buildings depreciate so much, and then they hit a bottom, and then they go up from there. And it's like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Okay, so like a brick has a value that drops so much, it can drop by, like, say, from whatever, $100 to $10. But then once it gets down to that $10 mark, it holds its value there, and then it actually increases in value. Like a copper pipe, electrical wire, plastic, whatever it is, in this society, in capitalism, wherever we live in Australia, in America, it doesn't matter. Everything is inflating all the time. So once that brick hits the bottom, it will go up in value. And just to demonstrate this, if you just think about sand, for example, the value of sand, like, what you might think it's worthless. The answer is no, it's not worthless. The materials that make up a house, like a property, are not worthless. They have value. And if you look back 30 years ago and check the value of sand or the value of brick or the value of a copper pipe or the value of an electrical wire, it was probably maybe like a third, if not less, than what it is today. So think that in the back of your mind. Remember that buildings do depreciate, but once they hit rock bottom, actually the building starts appreciating again. So this is the good stuff, okay? So what you got to think about when you're fixating on fixating on buying a house over an apartment, it's like, where I'm buying this house, what is the actual land value? Because people are so hell-bent on buying a house that they will buy a house that is literally in the middle of nowhere. And what you got to understand is, yes, the house has a huge land component, but what is the value of that land component? Like, for example, you could buy some land in Australia on a farm somewhere, and the value of the land is less than 50 cents per square meter. Just let that sink in. Don't buy land just because land goes up, buildings appreciate. Land appreciates, buildings depreciate. You've got that stuck in your head, because you've got to understand what is the value of the actual land you're buying. Okay? So, for example, if you were to go in some regional town and you were to buy a property on some land, the land in a regional town may only be worth, and you've got to check this yourself, these are just some numbers to demonstrate, but the land in a regional town here might only be worth 250 a square meter, okay? So that means if you buy a property on a 500 square meter lot, essentially the land value, it's like, yeah, you've got a lot of land. What is it worth though? The land value, if it's only 250 a square meter, and you buy 500 square meters of land, you're buying $125,000 worth of land. Okay? Whereas, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, a lot of people don't think about, what is the value of land in the city? Like if you're to buy an apartment in the city or in a highly dense area, what is the value of the land there? The value of the land there per square meter in the city might be $10,000 a square meter. Now let's do the maths. Everyone's so worried about buying apartments in large apartment complexes. Like, for example, if I told someone you should buy this apartment in this 150 apartment complex, they're like, hell no, somebody told me don't buy apartments one day. I'm not doing that. But you got to look at the numbers, right? So if you look, if you're buying an apartment and the whole complex is on a 2,000 square meter lot and they built a high rise, well, what is that actual lot worth if it's 2,000 square meters? Well, if the land is $10,000 a square meter, the entire lot is worth 20 mil. Now, if you have an apartment complex and it's 150 apartments in the complex and you own a portion of that, 150 divided by 20 mil equals $133,000, right? So isn't that funny? Isn't that funny that when you actually look at the numbers, when you actually do the maths, if you were to buy that apartment complex in the city with 150 other apartments, although you only have like a slither of a piece of land, the fact is the land is still worth more than if you bought a regional parcel of land for 500 square meters. That's crazy, right? And what else you've got to understand is buying in a city, in a metro area, the economy is so much stronger, so much more robust than it would be in a regional town. So the likelihood of that land holding its value is much higher. For example, if you go into some regional areas, literally nothing could happen in the town for 20 years because it's got no economy and the value could not go up. Okay, so I would always, if I have the choice, prefer to buy in a metro area or a city because the economy is stronger, and we'll get more into that later. But yeah, and then here's another thing that you've really got to think about when it comes to buying properties, and here, old properties, and I said it before, old properties, once they have fully depreciated, they actually hold their value and start going up. So generally buildings depreciate for a period of time and then they hit the rock bottom, and then actually guess what happens? They start going up again. So, and here's some numbers for you, which you should understand if you're buying property. So for example, if you were to build a new property in a regional area, it might cost $2,200 a square meter. And a 3-bedroom regional house might be 180 square meters. So how much is the actual replacement cost for a house? And the reason I'm mentioning the replacement cost in a house or in a property is because if you can buy at the land value, or if as close to it as possible, and then you can also buy below the replacement cost. That's something you should be thinking about. When you're buying existing properties, you should be thinking about what is the replacement cost of this property. If I was to build it again, I want to buy it below that price, because the reality is there will never be another opportunity that they cannot. If they're building more properties around you, they cannot be built for less than the price it costs to build it, right? So understand that. But yeah, here, regional property, you're paying, to build a new one, you're paying $2,200 a square meter. And if you're building 180 square meters, it's a $400K property. In the city apartment, it costs a lot more to build in the city per square meter, obviously. And that would cost around $6,500 a square meter. If you had a 40 square meter apartment, that would be $260. So essentially, if you take this number and the land value number, you always want to be buying under that number, at least under that number. Ideally much further under that number. But, essentially what you want to be buying is, when I think about it, every time I think about buying property, I'm like, I want to buy this property for as close to land value as possible and it be generating income. Okay? Now, something I just wanted to mention here, when you're buying into a regional town, you really got to understand what's the economy like there. Is it a strong economy? Is it a weak economy? And how easy is it going to be for me to rent out this property? If you're a property investor, you need to rent out your property. And what you have to understand in regional towns is sometimes it's easy to rent out in regional towns, and sometimes it is, most of the time, it's really not. And there's a few things that are at play here. There's just not that much demand. So you could put I've seen regional properties on the market for half a year. So when you're doing your maths, when you're doing your calculations as an investor, doing like cash flow over the cost, you're trying to work out your cash flows, your rental income, and how much it's going to cost you to own the property. You've got to factor those things in. Okay, so if I bought a property in a strong economy, like in a metro area, the likelihood of me getting it rented out is just much higher. Okay, there's more people there. It's when it comes to market downturns, there's not so much of a shock to the economy. It bounces back quicker. And also, here's something else that's important. When you're finding professionals like property managers to find tenants for your property, if you're in a regional area, and there's only a handful of property managers, they might all be shit. Like, it might be hard for you to find a good property manager, and frankly, property managers is what's going to make your property investment journey stressless. If you don't have good property managers, you're going to be stressed. Now, with the property, and like, I like buying in metro areas because the reality is I have so many options to pick from when it comes to property managers, so I've got a better chance of finding a good property manager, which will make my life easier. And another random thing that I want to talk to is not related to this, but it's related to buying and sourcing investment properties. You need to understand market cycles. You want to buy at the start of a market cycle or before it kicks off. You don't want to buy at the end, you can buy at the middle of a market cycle. The best time to buy is obviously the start of a market cycle, but definitely do not buy at the end of a market cycle. That is not a good investment decision. So hopefully this helped. Basically, I just wanted to highlight the fact that apartments versus houses isn't a real thing when it comes to investment decisions. It's what are the numbers and how do the numbers work in terms of, am I buying value? Does this purchase price make sense in terms of value, in terms of how much it should cost to build it, in terms of how much it should cost in relation to the land value? That's how I make my decisions, and that's what's made me a lot of money in the last 3 years, made me $1 million of equity growth, thinking through these frameworks. And if you want to make good investment decisions, you have to chuck your emotion away. Just forget about that. All right. Hopefully this helped. And if you like this video, just subscribe. If you have any more questions, just feel free to ask and I'll answer them. No problem.